Welcome to Experts Explain Trauma. Today we've got Dr. Iden joining us, and he is a sleep specialist. And he's going to be answering questions that survivors have about sleep and the lack thereof. And he's also going to be answering questions to help us get a better night's sleep. Okay, Dr. Iden, here's our question for today. Why do so many trauma survivors struggle to fall or stay asleep? And what's really happening in the nervous system when the body refuses to rest?
Okay, so this is really all tied in with our body's threat detection system and our body's stress system. And so people who have experienced trauma in the past very frequently will have overactive threat detection systems and overactive stress systems. And what we have to understand about sleep is that historically, from an evolutionary point of view, sleep is a time when we are our most vulnerable because we are not conscious to the world. We're not able to, during sleep, stave off predators. And so the brain has an overriding mechanism. The brain has a mechanism whereby if we don't feel safe, then it will impair sleep. It will inhibit sleep. So people with any reason for having an overactive threat detection system, an overactive stress system, and there are many reasons for that, and previous trauma is one of those things, are always going to find it more difficult to fall asleep because their brain is always on alert. And for us to fall asleep effectively, we need enough sleepiness. We need to have been awake for long enough. We need our body clock to be in sync, but we also need our mind to be quiet, our threat detection system to be dialed down, and for us to feel really safe. And when all those things are coming together at the same time, that's great. We'll fall asleep. But if any one of those is out of sync, or not in an optimal place, then that can really kind of impact and block sleep. And so, and that's by design. That's by design. We don't want, evolutionary, we don't want to be falling asleep if we're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, or in modern times, if we're walking down a dark alley at night time, for example. These are not times that we want to be falling asleep. So the body has these built-in mechanisms for overriding sleep and making us awake and alert. But unfortunately, in certain situations, like people who've experienced trauma in the past, we have these long-standing and maladaptive responses which keep our alert system on high alert all the time. Which will impair sleep through a number of mechanisms, but increasing activity of what's known as the sympathetic nervous system, which is the kind of alerting section of our nervous system, increasing levels of stress hormones like cortisol and like adrenaline. And so all of these acting together stimulate the wake part of the brain and block sleep. And so this is kind of the key, or one of the key kind of biological mechanisms by which people who've experienced trauma will find difficulty falling off to sleep and staying asleep as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a physical therapist say to me one time, this is kind of along the same lines of how our brain works, but, he said, oftentimes people are in more pain at night. And he asked me, he goes, do you know why? And I said, yeah, that's true. Because like sometimes, when I've had surgery or something, it seems like the pain is worse at night. And he says, because your brain doesn't have anything else to do but focus on the pain. So it's kind of a mechanism that's created to protect us, but out of balance, it causes us to lose sleep and rest.
That's true. That's true. And that's part of the story is that actually when we're lying in bed, it's the first time in the day that most of us have had to actually just be alone with our thoughts and to not have anything else to do. But that's actually only part of the story. There's also this concept of the mind after midnight. So our brains work in a very, very different way during the night than they do during the day. And this is, again, it's by design. It's part of our 24-hour circadian rhythm, which is just a fancy term for body clock, really. So we know that during the night, some of the neurotransmitters that bump up our mood, such as serotonin, they tend to dip down to their lowest levels. So we often feel lower in mood. We know that during the night, from a survival mechanism point of view, our threat detection systems tend to be ramped up a little bit more, like the amygdala and the hypothalamus. And we also know that the rational part of our brain, the most evolved part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive function and decision making, but is also responsible for making sense of things, responsible for our personality, responsible for impulse control, responsible for applying logic and really kind of dissecting complex things. That very human part, that most evolved part of our brain, is dialed really down low at nighttime after midnight. And so we get this kind of perfect storm, really, of exaggerated threat response, dialed down logic and kind of sensible processing, and this time alone, which is the first time we've had all day to kind of go over things. But unfortunately,
True.
it's pretty much the worst time to go over things because of what's
Yeah.
going on chemically in our brains. And so a technique that we often teach people is something known as constructive worry. I don't know whether you've come across this. And this is the idea that actually you don't leave the worrying and the thinking about things until you get to bed at night time. You do it in a much more constructive way. So we suggest doing it in the early part of the evening, not waiting till it's just before going to bed, and writing down your worries. There's something really interesting that happens in the brain when you actually physically write things down. You can use apps too; they can be helpful too, but actually physically with pen and paper writing it down seems to activate different part of the brain, and that really kind of seems to be helpful. So writing down the things that are on your mind, the things that are worrying you, your to-do list, the things that have been kind of bugging you, but also writing down next to it a column of how you're going to deal with those things and when you're going to deal with those things, and getting those thoughts out onto paper, and in a slightly more timely fashion when our minds are kind of working in a bit more of a bit more of a rational way, can be really, really helpful in reducing some of those repetitive negative thoughts that tend to go round in our head, particularly when somebody is suffering with insomnia. If they're having difficulty getting off to sleep, if it's the first time they've had all night to think about these things, all day rather, to think about these things, they tend to go in these repetitive negative thought cycles. And so getting all of that out physically onto a piece of paper earlier on in the evening can be really, really effective at reducing the risk of that happening.
There is something to be said about writing stuff out. I talk about that all the time on my podcast, and writing it. Yeah, I like to type because my fingers can keep up with my brain, but there
Yeah,
is something about writing it out because it makes you slow down, I guess, but it works for me. Plus, when it's on paper, it's not as big as it was in my head. In my head,
yeah,
it felt like, it was this big, massive thing, and then I put it down on paper and it's like, "Oh, okay, that's actually manageable," and I love that. So what I find interesting, and it makes such sense what you were saying, is when we're going to bed at night, our brain is going into a different place. It doesn't act the same way it does during the day because it's got a different job at night that it's got to do.
100%,
So we're
100%.
vulnerable. That makes complete sense why we begin to ruminate. I know I tend to ruminate. And so sitting down earlier in the evening and writing out all the to-dos, the things, just even I do what I call a brain dump. Just write down what's in your brain. Just write it
Yeah,
down and
yeah.
get it out of here, and it will help you to relax better at night.
And there's tons of evidence that back that up, both in terms of people who've experienced trauma, but also other types of mental health conditions. So people with depression, anxiety of other
Mhm.
causes. There's loads of evidence base out there that shows that this really works. And it's something that for a lot of people can feel kind of unnatural.
Yeah.
We get quite a lot of pushback on it when we suggest it, particularly in men. Um, but it's something that I find that if you feel that if you feel that you're somebody who isn't a natural kind of journaler, just try it. Just trying it for
Right.
a few nights, a week or two, and actually, people who manage to overcome that first hurdle often find that A, it's easier than they thought it was going to be, and B, that it really does help in ways that are difficult to describe, although you've done a really good job of describing them there.
Well, I tell you what, I am going to start this tonight. Both my husband and I'm going to highly suggest it because it makes such sense. Because I mean, I can sit at night anymore, and I've learned how to get myself calmed down. But I love this because I'll wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh, I forgot about that. I do that. So I love
Yeah.
that suggestion. That is a great suggestion. And men, try it. It works.
It does. It does. If you don't, if for men who kind of don't feel like they naturally want to do this, look up the science, because
Yeah.
sometimes men can be a little bit more data driven.
Yeah.
And if you look up the evidence base, it's just irrefutable. So
Yeah.
it's 100% worth a try.
Yeah. So, okay. So Dr. Iden's suggestion is that before you go to bed, a couple hours before, sit down and write out everything that's going on in your head. Just put it down on paper, your worries, your thoughts, your to-do list, write it all out, set it aside, and have a great night's sleep.
Yeah, and I think it's useful to add what you're going to do about it and when as well.
Yes, yes.
So not just the problem. So it depends what you're writing, obviously. But if you're writing out a list of a to-do list, or a list of things that are kind of taking up a lot of mental space, writing a solution to the problem, or a proposed solution, and when you're going to tackle it, is really helpful, because it tells your brain, even subconsciously, then, that I don't need to keep going over this again and again, because
Yeah.
I have a plan. I have a plan for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm glad you reminded me of it. Yeah, that makes sense, because otherwise now my brain's gonna sit there and try to resolve those problems that I just wrote down, right? Unless I write down some kind of solution.
Yeah, I mean, I think just writing the problems out is better than not doing it at all. But it's
Correct.
even better if we can come up with some solutions as well, or propose solutions. You don't know whether something's going to work or not, but just what your thoughts are about how to tackle it.
Yeah, at least where to start, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Iden. That was great. That was great. Do you have any questions for our experts? Let us know in the comments, and make sure to subscribe so that you can get more insightful information on trauma healing.